The night Meghan Markle walked toward the flashing lights, she believed she was still untouchable, still the woman who could silence a room with a single step. But behind those velvet ropes, behind those frozen smiles, behind those polite nods, something had already changed, and she had no idea. The fashion world had quietly decided she was no longer one of them. Because what no one told Meghan, what no one dared say to her face, was that doors weren't just closing, they were being locked. And not loudly, not publicly, silently, coldly, permanently. It didn't happen in one explosive moment. There was no dramatic confrontation, no official announcement, no press release declaring her exile. Instead, it happened the way Hollywood punishes its fallen icons, through whispers, through missing invitations, through empty seats where her name used to be printed in gold. And suddenly, the woman who once stood at the center of global fascination found herself standing outside, waiting, watching, uninvited, because insiders had already begun murmuring about it, murmuring that Meghan Markle had reportedly been placed on a quiet blacklist across major fashion events in New York and Los Angeles. And the decision wasn't emotional, it was strategic, it was calculated, and worst of all, it was unanimous. Fashion insiders weren't angry, they were done. Done with the unpredictability, done with the drama, done with the tension that seemed to follow her like a shadow she couldn't escape. Because fashion isn't just about clothes, it's about control. It's about power. It's about precision. And in that world, one unpredictable presence can destabilize everything. And according to those watching closely, Meghan had become exactly that, a disruption. Not the star of the show, but the risk behind it. It started with subtle changes, changes so small most outsiders never noticed. Invitations that didn't arrive, emails that went unanswered, calls that weren't returned, publicists who suddenly sounded distant, coordinators who suddenly claimed events were full. And Meghan, once accustomed to automatic access, began encountering something she hadn't faced in years: resistance. Because behind closed doors, organizers and luxury brands had reportedly begun aligning their decisions, quietly agreeing that the Duchess's presence was no longer worth the cost. Not because she wasn't famous, but because she was unpredictable. Because she didn't follow the rules. Because she didn't play the game the way everyone else did. And in fashion, that's unforgivable. There were whispers that she had been arriving at events without formal invitations, that she had been leveraging connections at the last minute, using her name like a key to unlock doors that weren't meant to open anymore. And at first, people tolerated it. Because she was Meghan Markle. Because she was the Duchess. Because she still carried the aura of royalty, even in exile. But tolerance has an expiration date, and hers had quietly passed. Insiders described a pattern that left organizers uneasy and brands cautious. They claimed Meghan would arrive, glide through the crowd, position herself perfectly for cameras, collect the photos she needed, and disappear before the night even reached its peak. It wasn't about the fashion. It wasn't about supporting designers. It was about optics. It was about being seen. It was about reminding the world she still belonged. But fashion insiders could see through it. They always do. Because fashion isn't fooled by performance. It demands loyalty. And loyalty, they believed, was something Meghan no longer offered. But the moment that allegedly changed everything, the moment insiders would later describe as the final signal, came during a high-profile Kardashian family event in Los Angeles. It was supposed to be another effortless appearance, another reminder of her relevance, another step back into the spotlight she refused to surrender. She arrived, she posed, she smiled, she played the part perfectly. Photos were taken, cameras flashed. The illusion held strong, at least for a moment. But then something strange happened. The photos vanished, not gradually, not accidentally, suddenly. Images that had circulated online disappeared within hours, erased like they had never existed. And in Hollywood, photos don't just disappear. They're removed, intentionally, strategically, deliberately. Because in an industry obsessed with image control, every photo is currency, and removing one sends a message louder than words ever could. Something had gone wrong, and everyone knew it, but no one said it publicly. Because Hollywood doesn't expose you, it freezes you out. Fashion insiders began talking, quietly, privately, cautiously. They began questioning her presence, questioning whether she had even been officially invited, questioning whether she had crossed an invisible boundary no one had explained to her. And suddenly, the whispers turned into decisions. Decisions that would reshape her access. Decisions that would reshape her relevance. Decisions she couldn't control. Because in the fashion world, reputation travels faster than truth. Designers talk, publicists talk, event planners talk. And once a narrative forms, it becomes reality. And the narrative form forming around Meghan wasn't flattering. It was dangerous. There were growing concerns about backstage tension, rumors of difficult interactions, stories of volatile moments, accounts of staff leaving in tears after encounters they never expected to have. None of it confirmed publicly. But confirmation isn't necessary in fashion. Perception is enough, because perception becomes protection. Protection becomes exclusion, and exclusion becomes exile. One insider's words cut deeper than any headline ever could. She doesn't elevate the room, she destabilizes it. That single sentence spread quietly across fashion circles. Not screamed, not announced, but remembered, repeated, believed. Because fashion doesn't forgive instability. It erases it. And Meghan, once the woman who electrified every room she entered, was now becoming the woman those same rooms feared. Feared not because she lacked power, but because she still had enough power to disrupt everything. And disruption in an industry built on control is the ultimate threat. Because fashion isn't about who you were yesterday. It's about whether you're still valuable today. And Meghan Markle, the woman who once transcended Hollywood and royalty, was now confronting a reality she never imagined possible. Irrelevance. Not announced, not confirmed, but undeniable, because the silence around her was louder than any headline ever could be. The most dangerous moment in Meghan Markle's fall wasn't when the camera stopped flashing, it was when she realized no one was even looking for her anymore, because there's a difference between controversy and disappearance. Controversy keeps you alive, disappearance erases you, and somewhere between the whispered complaints, the vanished invitations, and the doors that quietly stopped opening, Meghan Markle had crossed into the most terrifying phase of fame, the phase where people stopped fighting her and started ignoring her. At first, she didn't see it. How could she? This was the same woman who once walked into the royal family and shattered centuries of tradition without blinking. The same woman who became the most Googled person on earth. The same woman whose wedding stopped the world, whose interviews ignited international debates, whose very existence seemed to bend media cycles around her. She wasn't supposed to fade, she was supposed to dominate. But dominance in Hollywood comes with conditions, and those conditions demand something ruthless: consistency, relevance, control. And slowly, painfully, those three pillars began slipping through her fingers. Because insiders began noticing something unsettling, Meghan wasn't being talked about the way she used to be. Not with obsession, not with fascination, not even with outrage, just with caution. Because fashion houses, once eager to attach themselves to her aura, had reportedly begun distancing themselves entirely, not out of anger, but out of calculation. Because controversy is profitable, but unpredictability is dangerous. And Meghan, in their eyes, had become both. Behind the scenes, executives and brand strategists began asking questions they never thought they'd need to ask. Is she still an asset? Or has she become a liability? Because brands don't chase fame. They chase stability. They chase control. And Meghan's story had become impossible to control. For years, she had shielded herself behind a powerful narrative that she was misunderstood, unfairly targeted, and relentlessly scrutinized by forces determined to tear her down. And for a long time, that narrative worked. It protected her. It rallied support. It turned criticism into sympathy. But sympathy has limits, and insiders began saying that fashion insiders no longer viewed her through the lens of injustice, they viewed her through the lens of risk. Because fashion doesn't operate on emotion. It operates on protection. Protection of image. Protection of investment. Protection of power. And Meghan's presence, once seen as glamorous, had reportedly become unpredictable, something brands couldn't afford to gamble on. Because every time she appeared somewhere unexpectedly, every time she created headlines that weren't planned, every time she pulled attention away from the very designers she was supposed to support, she reminded them of something they couldn't ignore. She didn't need fashion. Fashion needed control, and she couldn't be controlled. Meanwhile, inside her private world, frustration was reportedly building. Because Meghan wasn't someone who accepted decline easily. She wasn't someone who stepped back quietly. She wasn't someone who faded willingly. She was someone who fought, someone who adapted, someone who reinvented herself again and again, transforming from actress to Duchess, from Duchess to activist, from activist to producer, always chasing the next version of herself before the previous one expired. But reinvention only works when people believe in it, and belief, once broken, is nearly impossible to restore. Because even Hollywood, the industry that thrives on redemption stories, had begun showing signs of fatigue. The Netflix deals that once promised dominance prominence had lost their initial spark. The explosive royal exit that once guaranteed endless headlines had grown distant. The Oprah interview that once shook the monarchy had become history. And history doesn't sustain relevance. It preserves it, traps it, freezes it in time, leaving the present empty. Insiders began whispering that Prince Harry himself had grown increasingly restless behind the scenes, reportedly meeting with advisors, strategists, and media experts, searching desperately for a new direction, a new narrative, a new lifeline that could pull them back into cultural dominance. Because relevance doesn't last forever. It must be maintained, fed, protected, and without the monarchy as their central conflict, without the constant tension that once fueled global fascination, they were facing something neither of them had ever truly faced before. Silence. Not peaceful silence, dangerous silence. Because silence means the story is over. And Meghan Markle had built her entire identity on continuing the story. But now, insiders described her as restless, frustrated, anxious, watching the world move forward without her, watching new figures rise, watching new scandals replace old ones, watching attention shift away from her and toward the next obsession. Because Hollywood never stops. It replaces. It evolves. It forgets, and forgetting is the cruelest punishment of all. There were whispers that she had begun blaming those closest to her, publicists, advisors, strategists, accusing them of failing to protect her image, failing to maintain her momentum, failing to preserve the influence she believed was still hers. Because in her mind, the fall didn't make sense. How could the woman who once commanded global attention now struggle to command invitations? How could the Duchess who once walked palace corridors now face closed doors in fashion capitals? How could the symbol of modern royalty now be treated like an outsider? But Hollywood doesn't answer those questions. It simply moves on. And perhaps the most painful reality wasn't the blacklist itself. It was what it symbolized, because the fashion world wasn't just rejecting Meghan Markle. It was rejecting what she represented. A reminder of yesterday's obsession, a reminder of yesterday's controversy, a reminder of yesterday's power. Because fashion only worships the present, and the present had already chosen someone else. Meanwhile, those closest to Prince Harry reportedly noticed something even more alarming. He looked tired, not physically, emotionally. The prince who once defied an empire now appeared quieter, more cautious, more uncertain, because even he understood something Meghan was still fighting to accept. The world they left behind had moved forward without them, and the world they entered was no longer waiting for them. Because Hollywood doesn't crown royalty, it consumes it, and when it's finished, it discards it, leaving behind nothing but memories of what once was. And now, Meghan Markle stood at a crossroads more terrifying than any royal confrontation, more isolating than any tabloid scandal, more permanent than any public criticism. Because this wasn't about headlines. This wasn't about rumors. This wasn't about public opinion. This was about access. And access, once revoked, is nearly impossible to reclaim. Because somewhere behind guarded entrances and velvet ropes, decisions had already been made. Not loudly, not publicly, but definitively. And for the first time since she stepped into global fame, Meghan Markle wasn't fighting her critics. She was fighting irrelevance. And irrelevance never loses.